I never thought that letting my daughter move into my home would one day leave me standing on the front porch like a beggar. The suitcase hit the floor with a heavy thud. The metal clasp snapped open, and my clothes spilled out like my dignity bursting loose. Lisa's face twisted with disgust, her voice rising like a whip crack in the polished silence of the kitchen. "I can't take care of you, Mom. I'm not running a charity." I stood still, gripping my cane tighter as my body trembled. My bones ached from the sickness that had already drained so much of my strength. The air smelled of expensive jasmine candles and fresh paint, the renovations she had so eagerly started. All funded, of course, by my husband's inheritance. My inheritance. My home. Lisa's husband, Brandon, leaned against the kitchen island, arms crossed, eyes cold. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence screamed his approval. "You think you can just sit here, rotting away, while we have to take care of everything? We're not your servants, Mother." Lisa spat the word, like it left a foul taste in her mouth. "It's not our fault you got sick." My lips parted, but no words came. My heart slammed against my ribs like a trapped bird. After everything, after all I had given, this was how she saw me. She tossed an envelope onto the counter. "Here, $200. That's all you have left in your private account, unless you want to dip into what we manage." What they manage. She had said it so casually, as though my late husband's decades of hard work now belonged to them by default. As though I had already vanished. I looked down at the suitcase, half unzipped, socks peeking out like embarrassed little witnesses to my humiliation. My chest burned, but my voice stayed even. "I opened this house to you, Lisa, to help you, to give you both a chance." Lisa laughed, sharp, bitter. "And you should be grateful we stayed. Do you know how much we sacrificed taking care of you? Honestly, you should have moved to a facility months ago." Behind her, Brandon exhaled, his mouth curving into a thin smile. He wanted me gone. He always had. I couldn't cry. Not in front of them. My pride wouldn't allow it. I straightened as much as my failing spine allowed and reached for the handle of my suitcase. The house behind me gleamed under the recessed lighting. The marble countertops, the new appliances, the crystal chandelier. All of it paid for by years of sacrifice. Years when I denied myself vacations, new clothes, even proper health care, just to build a safety net after my husband died. And now they had stripped me of it, while dressing their theft in the language of concern. Lisa folded her arms. "Well, are you leaving? Or do I need to call someone?" I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of 30 years of motherhood pressing against my ribs. I had raised her. I had held her hand through every scraped knee, every heartbreak, and now she stood in front of me, my own daughter, banishing me like unwanted furniture. Without another word, I dragged my suitcase toward the door. The wheels thudded across the polished oak floor, each thud like a drumbeat counting out the death of my last illusion. As I crossed the threshold, I heard Lisa's parting words, cold and hollow. "Don't come crawling back when you realize you can't handle life on your own." I didn't turn around, not even as the door slammed behind me. I stood outside the house that used to be my home. My legs shook, but not from the sickness this time, from the weight of what had just happened. The silence around me roared louder than Lisa's screaming ever had. I had nowhere to go, nowhere I belonged. After my husband died, it felt only natural to let Lisa and Brandon move in. They were struggling back then, barely making ends meet. Brandon had lost his job, and Lisa said the rent was bleeding them dry. She cried on the phone that night, her voice shaking as she told me how scared she was. My mother's heart couldn't bear it. Of course I said yes. They moved into the guest suite first. It was temporary, they promised, just until Brandon found steady work. But days stretched into weeks, weeks into months. Eventually, Brandon settled into some consulting job, but the temporary arrangement somehow became permanent. They started making small changes in the house, first in the kitchen, then the living room. I said nothing. I wanted them to feel comfortable. I told myself that's what family does. At first, having them there eased the crushing loneliness that had followed my husband's death. The house was no longer so quiet. Lisa would sit with me during my treatments, bring me tea when I felt weak, and even braid my thinning hair like she used to as a little girl. I thought we were healing together, but that softness faded. Subtle things shifted. Lisa's tone grew sharper. Her patience wore thinner. She started talking down to me, suggesting I was forgetting things, questioning if I'd taken my medication or paid certain bills. Brandon, always hovering nearby, would nod along, making sure his support for her was loud enough for me to hear. Their concern never sounded like love, more like management. And I let it happen. I told myself it was their way of coping, that maybe I was slipping. After all, I was older, sick, and no longer as sharp as I once was. But I wasn't blind. The bank statements stopped arriving at my mailbox. Lisa insisted she handle them to make things easier. She told me my health should be my only concern now. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe my own daughter would never manipulate me like this. And yet, tonight, her screaming face burned behind my eyelids. After everything I sacrificed, after opening my home to them, after trusting them, she saw me as nothing but weight dragging her down. I sat on the bench outside the small motel I'd managed to find, with the few bills in my pocket. My head leaned back against the wall, staring up at the stars barely visible beyond the city lights. This wasn't just about tonight. This was years in the making. I could finally see that now. I whispered into the night, my voice barely audible even to myself. They loved my money more than me. The words sat bitter on my tongue, but they were true. And once you face a truth like that, you can never unsee it. The next morning, I sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at my old purse sitting on the small table. Inside it were 200 crumpled dollars. That's all I had left in my name, or so they thought. I clutched my cane and stood, my joints protesting with every movement. The sickness had made me slow, but not stupid, not blind. Not yet. In those early months after Lisa and Brandon moved in, the shift had been so gradual, I almost missed it. The way she started slipping questions into every conversation. Mom, are you sure you paid the gas bill? Maybe you're getting forgetful. Mom, let me handle the accounts. You need rest. It's too much for you to worry about all these complicated financial forms at your age. At first, it felt like love, like help. But soon, the mail stopped coming to me altogether. The online banking accounts, all passwords were changed. She explained it like it was for my own good. You don't need to stress yourself with these things, Mom. Just let me handle it. You trust me, don't you? Of course I trusted her. She was my daughter. Then came the papers. I still remember that Sunday afternoon in the sunroom, the way Lisa placed the documents on my lap like a casual favor. Mom? The lawyer suggested consolidating everything. The accounts, the house deed, your will. It'll make it easier for me to handle things if something happens to you. She smiled sweetly. We're just being responsible. I hesitated. But the house is still in my name, right? She laughed. Of course. You'll always be the owner, Mom. This just makes management easier. She pointed to where I should sign, rushing me gently with her words. Don't worry about the details. The lawyer already approved everything. Like a fool, I signed. And from that moment on, little by little, my world stopped belonging to me. At dinners, Lisa would sit at the head of the table, my table, while Brandon refilled her wine and whispered in her ear, both of them pretending I was simply too fragile to handle responsibility. To anyone else watching, they looked like loving caregivers, thoughtful, dutiful. I watched as my home transformed room by room, renovations I hadn't approved, purchases I hadn't made, credit cards I didn't own. And every time I asked, Lisa would smile and say, "It's all taken care of, Mom. Relax, relax." That word made my skin crawl. I had begun to suspect the truth long before last night, but hearing her laughing on the phone, mocking me, had torn away every last shred of denial. And now I was here, in a cheap motel, abandoned, discarded like a used-up servant. But for the first time in years, a small, unfamiliar feeling stirred inside me. It wasn't rage. Not yet. It was clarity. They thought I was weak. They thought they had taken everything. But they made one mistake. They forgot who raised Lisa. They forgot I wasn't just an old woman. I was a wife who had survived grief. A mother who had once held this entire family together with nothing but my bare hands. And beneath the fatigue, beneath the sickness, I was still that woman. I reached for my old flip phone, one of the few things they hadn't bothered to control. There was one person who might still be able to help me sort out the mess I'd let them create. My old lawyer, Mr. Kaplan. As I dialed his number, my voice finally felt steady again. "Hello, Mr. Kaplan. I need your help." Mr. Kaplan agreed to meet me the next afternoon at his quiet office on Willow Street. Same place as always. The familiarity of the heavy oak door and the faint scent of old books wrapped around me like a strange kind of comfort as I walked in. He stood as I entered. "Margaret." His voice was gentle, but firm, like always. "You don't look well." I managed a small smile. "I've seen better days." He didn't press. He simply gestured for me to sit and pulled out a thick file from his desk drawer. "I've kept copies of all your legal documents since your husband passed," he said, tapping the file. "The house deed, your accounts, your husband's inheritance, everything." My throat tightened. "Mr. Kaplan, I need to know. Do I still own my house?" He nodded, flipping open the file. "Your name remains the sole legal owner of the property, Margaret. You never signed over the deed. The documents your daughter had you sign 2 years ago were management authorizations, not ownership transfers. They allow her to access accounts, manage payments, handle certain financial transactions. But the assets themselves, they're still yours." For a moment, the world tilted. I had prepared myself for the worst, for the possibility that Lisa had already stolen everything outright. But here it was, a sliver of hope, a lifeline. Mr. Kaplan watched me closely. "I suspect your daughter led you to believe otherwise." I couldn't stop the bitter laugh that escaped me. She made me feel like I was a helpless old woman who couldn't even balance a checkbook. His expression darkened. Financial elder abuse is, unfortunately, more common than people realize. But you haven't lost legal control, Margaret. Not yet. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. Not yet. But if you continue to let them manage your affairs without oversight, he added carefully, they could push for conservatorship down the road, argue mental incapacity, especially if neighbors or family start believing the lies. I opened my eyes again, my voice low. "They're already spreading stories. She's told relatives that I've lost my mind, that I left the house voluntarily." Neighbors whisper behind my back. His jaw clenched. "Then we'll need to act quickly." He slid a new set of documents across the desk. "We can revoke her management authorizations today. Freeze access to any accounts she controls. File an affidavit confirming your mental competence. I'll have a doctor ready to evaluate you this week. After that, we'll secure injunctions to prevent further unauthorized spending." I stared at the papers, my hand hovering above them. My whole body trembled, not from fear, but from the magnitude of what I was about to reclaim. "They think I'm powerless," I whispered. Mr. Kaplan smiled faintly. "Then let's remind them who they're dealing with." As I signed each page, something inside me shifted. For years I had lived quietly, patiently, trying not to upset the balance, hoping love would conquer greed. But love without respect is nothing but a leash. I had cut that leash today. The motel room felt smaller that night. The floral wallpaper, the humming air conditioner, the stiff bed. None of it mattered. For the first time in months, I could breathe. I had the papers. I had the legal authority back in my hands. It wasn't over. Far from it. But the fog Lisa wrapped me in was lifting. The next morning, I went to the bank. The young man behind the desk smiled politely, probably trained not to show surprise, when an old woman with puffy eyes and trembling hands walked in clutching legal papers. His name tag said Greg. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said after scanning the documents Mr. Kaplan had prepared, "everything checks out. Your accounts were still registered solely under your name. Your daughter only had temporary financial management authority. Since you've revoked that, we've locked her access." A part of me couldn't believe how easy it sounded. She'd made me think she already owned everything, but all this time, she had only controlled what I allowed, because I trusted her. Greg continued, "I've reopened your online access and set a new password." He slid a fresh card and papers toward me. The balance stared up at me from the printout. The account wasn't empty. She hadn't drained it yet, though she'd certainly spent a chunk of it. Renovations, new furniture, God knows what else. But enough remained to keep me standing. I gripped the edge of the desk as a wave of quiet satisfaction rose inside me. She thought she had stripped me bare. She thought I had nothing but $200 left. She was wrong. "Thank you, Greg," I said softly. As I left the bank, I walked slower than usual, not because of my weak legs, but because for once, there was no need to rush. Every step felt deliberate, measured. Outside, the city hummed as it always had, indifferent to the small war unfolding in my life. But I felt stronger, steadier, as if I were walking inside an invisible wall of armor. Lisa and Brandon had been bold, because they assumed I was too old, too sick, too broken to fight back. But they never understood. Quiet doesn't mean weak. I had begun to pull my life back, piece by piece, like loose threads I never should have let go, and this time, I would not let them slip through my fingers again. That evening, back in the tiny motel room, I sat at the little desk, staring at the stack of papers Mr. Kaplan had given me. My hands traced the edges, slowly, carefully, as if I was afraid they might vanish if I looked away. Outside, the neon light from the motel sign flickered against the thin curtains. The soft hum of passing cars faded into a kind of steady silence that filled my ears. For the first time in weeks, there was no one interrupting me. No voices dripping with false concern. No carefully rehearsed smiles masking contempt. It was just me. And the truth. I never wanted this. When my husband died, I thought I could still hold this family together. Lisa had always been strong-willed, but I believed if I opened my home, made her feel secure, maybe she'd soften. Maybe she would feel gratitude. But kindness can be dangerous in the wrong hands. I thought back to the early days, the way she clung to me after Brandon lost his job. The quiet tears she shed when she said she didn't want to burden me, but had nowhere else to go. I wrapped my arms around her then, whispering the same promise I'd made so many times in her life. "You always have a home with me." And she used that promise like a lever to pry everything open. I gave her my house, my trust, my accounts. I signed forms I didn't fully read because she was my daughter. I swallowed my doubts because mothers forgive, mothers endure. But sitting here now, under the pale motel lamp, I saw the cold simplicity of it all. She didn't want to help me. She wanted control. She wanted what was mine. She dressed it up as concern, like she was protecting me from my own weakness. But it was never about love. It was about power. The realization didn't make me angry. Not anymore. I had wasted too much time being hurt. Now I simply felt clear. The years I sacrificed weren't mistakes. They were choices. Choices I made because I believed in love, because I believed my family was worth it. But love without respect? That isn't family. That's slavery. I leaned back, listening to the soft buzz of the ancient motel refrigerator. My body ached with exhaustion, but my mind was sharp for the first time in years. They thought they'd won. They thought I'd crawl away, humiliated and defeated. But they forgot who raised this family, who built it from nothing, who stood beside my husband through every struggle while they were still children clinging to my skirts. I whispered to myself, not a prayer, not a wish, but a quiet promise. They'll learn what it means to steal from someone who made them everything they are. I closed my eyes, my hand resting on the documents. Tomorrow the next moves would begin. The next morning I dressed carefully. Simple, clean, modest. No one would look twice at me as I stepped into the financial advisor's office downtown. Lisa had always insisted on handling everything herself after my husband died. She told me it was too much stress for me to manage the investments, that I should focus on my health. I let her. I trusted her. But she'd underestimated how much I still remembered. How much I had quietly observed, quietly recorded. Mr. Kaplan had already called ahead. The advisor, Mr. Reed, a sharp young man with kind eyes, greeted me like I was someone who still mattered. "Mrs. Sullivan, please, have a seat. I've reviewed your accounts as per Mr. Kaplan's instructions." He spoke carefully, but I could see in his expression the unease beneath his professionalism. He'd seen the withdrawals, the large purchases, the luxury home improvements charged to accounts that were never meant for anyone but me. "I want all remaining funds transferred to a new private account," I said calmly. My voice didn't waver. "Sole access, no proxies, no third-party management." He nodded. "Of course. We'll freeze all the joint authorizations immediately." I signed the forms without hesitation this time. As the last pen stroke dried on the page, something inside me clicked into place. The first thread had been pulled. Now I watched the entire web start to loosen. While Lisa was still redecorating, renovating, celebrating her inheritance, thinking she had secured her future, I was slowly pulling every dollar back into my hands. The house was next. The legal ownership was still mine. She couldn't sell it, mortgage it, or even legally alter the title without my signature. But I knew Lisa. She was bold, careless. She thought my silence meant permission. She thought my illness meant surrender. But she didn't know I'd already contacted the city registry to place a flag on the property deed, blocking any unauthorized transactions. Every move was deliberate, quiet, legal. Lisa wouldn't suspect a thing. She would keep smiling to our relatives, hosting dinners, pretending to be the devoted daughter caring for her fragile mother, all while the foundation she stood on crumbled beneath her feet. And that was the key. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to fight. I would let her feel safe, right up until the moment she lost everything. It didn't take long for the whispers to reach me. At first, it was a neighbor's passing comment as I checked into Ruth's spare guest room, a friend from my church who had welcomed me without question. Then it was a message from my cousin, hesitant and full of concern. "Lisa said you weren't well, Margaret, that you needed time away." Time away. That's what she was telling people. "She's had some mental health struggles," Lisa had apparently told one aunt. "We've done everything we can, but she insisted on leaving the house for her own safety." I sat quietly on Ruth's porch, listening to the wind stir the leaves. I didn't even feel angry. The lies were as predictable as they were cruel. Lisa knew the importance of perception. If she painted me as unstable, it made everything she had done seem like an act of compassion. The neighbors believed it because they wanted to. Nobody likes to think a daughter could be that heartless. They'd rather believe the old woman had lost her mind. I could picture her playing the role perfectly, sighing deeply, voice quivering just enough. "It's been so hard watching Mom decline, but we're doing our best. Brandon's been such a rock through all this." And then, while the audience applauded her sacrifice, she was gutting my accounts, tearing apart my home, spending what she believed she had won. But she was sloppy. I still had friends, quiet ones, people who had known me long before Lisa's mask slipped into place, people who knew better than to believe her. Ruth placed a warm hand on mine as I sat stiff on her porch swing. "Let them talk, Margaret. They don't know the whole story." "I don't care about the neighbors," I said softly, staring into the distance. "I care that she's laying the groundwork. If enough people believe I'm incompetent, she'll try to take the next step. Guardianship." Ruth squeezed my hand gently. "But she won't succeed. Not this time." No, she wouldn't. Because while Lisa was feeding her lies to family and neighbors, she had no idea that my attorney had already scheduled the medical evaluations, the affidavits, the protective orders. Everything she was doing only helped build my case. The more she lied, the deeper she buried herself. "She thinks she's so clever," I murmured. Ruth gave a small, knowing smile. "That's the mistake, Margaret. They always think we're too tired to fight. I turned to her then, feeling something new ignite inside me. Not anger, not grief, but something colder, sharper. No one expects the quiet ones, I whispered. And this time, I wasn't going to whisper for much longer. The days blended into each other as I moved through each step with quiet precision. Every paper signed, every account reclaimed, every document secured. Ruth's house became my refuge. Her spare guest room, though small, felt like a fortress. There were no luxury finishes, no designer rugs, no marble countertops here. Just solid walls, warm meals, and someone who looked me in the eye without calculation. We'd sit at her kitchen table in the mornings, sipping coffee while I worked through the endless paperwork Mr. Kaplan sent over. "Do you ever think she regrets it?" Ruth asked one morning, carefully spreading butter on her toast. "Regret?" I let out a dry laugh. "Lisa doesn't regret. She only calculates." Ruth nodded, her face thoughtful. "People like her always confuse patience for weakness." I set the file aside. That was my mistake. I thought love could make someone grateful. For years, I had given Lisa everything I could. Not just my home, not just my money, but my trust. I had handed her my future because I thought mothers were supposed to. Because I believed my sacrifices would bind us closer. But love without respect isn't love at all. It's entitlement. And entitlement grows like mold in dark corners when you let it. Now I was shining light into those corners. Each time I spoke with Mr. Kaplan, the picture sharpened. Lisa had used my accounts to secure lines of credit. She had billed renovations directly against funds she assumed she'd control forever. She even financed Brandon's failing business ventures, siphoning my husband's hard-earned savings into their bottomless pit of bad decisions. And she thought I would simply fade away while she built her empire on my back. But every one of those transactions left a paper trail. Every document was becoming a weapon. We were weeks ahead of her. The injunctions were nearly ready. The asset freezes would take effect the moment Mr. Kaplan filed the final motions. And Lisa? She had no idea. She still thought she was winning. As I packed another envelope of forms to return to Kaplan's office, Ruth watched me closely. "You're calmer than I expected," she said. I looked at her and smiled. A quiet, tired smile. "I wasted too many years being angry, Ruth. Now I'm just done." The truth was, it no longer mattered how Lisa would react. The begging, the screaming, the righteous indignation that would pour out of her when the locks changed, all of it had already played out in my mind. What mattered now was that I was taking back what she never should have touched. Quiet doesn't mean weak, and soon she would learn just how dangerous quiet could be. Lisa had gone out of town that weekend, some overpriced spa retreat she'd booked using what she still believed was her inheritance. Brandon was with her, no doubt gorging himself on massages and champagne, unaware of the quiet storm gathering behind them. It was the perfect window. By mid-morning, I stood in front of my house again, not as an exile, but as its rightful owner. This time, I wasn't holding a suitcase. I held a thick, legal folder tucked tightly under my arm. The locksmith was already waiting at the curb, glancing at me with polite curiosity. "You sure you have the legal authority, ma'am?" he asked. I didn't take offense. He was being careful, and he should be. I handed him the court order and notarized documents Mr. Kaplan had prepared. "Every authority I need is right here." The man scanned them carefully, his brows rising slightly as he flipped through the pages. Everything was legitimate, watertight. "All right then," he said with a small nod. "Let's get started." I watched as he worked, removing the locks one by one. The click of each bolt falling free felt like a weight lifting from my chest. Inside the house, movers were already boxing up luxury items. Furniture, electronics, imported artwork. All of it purchased with my stolen funds. Court orders authorized the seizure. Anything bought improperly with my accounts was now frozen pending full restitution. The marble countertops gleamed under the kitchen lights Lisa had insisted were an investment in property value. Now they looked cold, sterile. For the first time, I saw the house for what it had become, a stage she decorated to impress others, not a home filled with love. The movers worked quickly but respectfully. None of them asked questions, though I saw the glances exchanged as they realized whose house this truly was. I didn't need to explain myself. By late afternoon, the new locks clicked into place. The keys were placed gently in my palm. "Done," the locksmith said softly. I stood there a moment longer, breathing in the space that once felt stolen from me. The floors I had polished, the walls I had painted with my husband, the dining table where I once served holiday dinners to a family I thought loved me. Now it was mine again, not because they gave it back, but because I took it back. Ruth pulled up to the curb and rolled down her window. Her face lit up when she saw me standing there, holding the keys. "Well?" she asked gently. "It's done," I said. My voice didn't shake, my hand didn't tremble. Ruth smiled and said exactly what I needed to hear. Now let's see how they handle coming home to reality. That night, I sat in Ruth's living room, the keys resting on the table in front of me. I couldn't stop staring at them. Simple, ordinary keys. But they felt heavier than gold. Ruth poured me a cup of tea and slid it across the table. She didn't say much. She didn't have to. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup and finally exhaled. "They underestimated me, Ruth." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "They always do." For so long, I had swallowed every insult, every manipulation, telling myself it was better to keep the peace, that I was keeping the family whole, that it was just easier to let them take small things, until those small things became everything. But sitting there, staring at those keys, I realized something I hadn't fully admitted before. I hadn't lost control, because I was weak. I lost it because I believed they would protect me, that they would cherish what I had built. I mistook convenience for love. I sipped the tea, feeling the warmth slide down my throat. "They thought I was tired," I whispered, "that being sick meant I wouldn't have the strength to fight." Ruth's voice was calm. "You were tired. You are tired. But tired doesn't mean done." I nodded slowly, the words sinking into my bones. That was it. That was what they never saw. I had raised Lisa. I had guided her through every stumble, every storm. I gave her more patience than she deserved, and she mistook my silence for surrender. But quiet people carry something dangerous inside. When they finally choose to stand, they stand with a clarity others can't match. I had thought survival meant keeping the peace. But now, for the first time in years, I was surviving for me. The thought didn't make me bitter. It made me clear. I looked over at Ruth, my voice steady and stronger than I had heard it in years. "This isn't about revenge anymore," I said. "It's about finally living my life on my own terms." Ruth's eyes glistened slightly. "That's what freedom sounds like, Margaret." I reached for the keys, letting the cool metal press into my palm. For so long, I had been waiting for them to give me back what they took. But they were never going to give it. They were never going to apologize, and I didn't need them to. I had taken it back myself. Tomorrow, the legal filings would go through. The asset freezes, the court orders, everything Mr. Kaplan had lined up like pieces on a chessboard. The storm was coming. And this time, it wouldn't be me caught in it. The following week unfolded like a quiet symphony. Every note carefully timed, every movement deliberate. Mr. Kaplan worked swiftly, filing motions that froze access to the accounts Lisa had been bleeding dry. The credit cards tied to my accounts were suspended. Lines of credit they had opened in my name were now flagged for investigation. The house deed was secured, locked behind layers of legal protections that Lisa wouldn't even see coming until it was far too late. "Your daughter's legal exposure is extensive," Kaplan said during our meeting, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed the documents. "Unauthorized expenditures, mismanagement of trust funds, potential fraud. They've left fingerprints all over everything. I sat across from him, calm, steady. I didn't need to raise my voice or shout about what they had done to me. The documents would speak for me. The law would speak for me. "Do you think she'll fight?" I asked. Kaplan smiled thinly. "She won't have much room to. The evidence is thorough. The moment the eviction notice is served, the game changes." I leaned back in the chair, feeling the weight of what was finally unfolding. I had allowed Lisa to pull the strings for too long, thinking that family loyalty would somehow soften her greed. But greed doesn't soften. It grows. It devours. "She believes I'll never be strong enough to confront her," I said softly. "She's counting on me being too embarrassed, too afraid to fight my own daughter." Kaplan nodded. "Most abusers count on silence." Not anymore. The movers had already cataloged every major purchase made with my accounts. The new designer furniture, the luxury appliances, the imported rugs she boasted about to her friends. Each item was now under legal review, every dollar tied to the inheritance my husband left for me. I had even found the old insurance policies my husband set up years ago, tucked away in a safe deposit box Lisa never thought to look for. Policies she had no knowledge of. Accounts untouched by her greed. It was almost laughable how thorough my husband had been. "He prepared for everything," I said aloud. Kaplan glanced up. "Except for her." I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. He couldn't have imagined our daughter would turn into this. Ruth drove me back to her house afterward. The air smelled of rain. The world felt calm. But underneath it, the storm I had set in motion gathered strength. "You're ready, Margaret," Ruth said as we pulled into her driveway. "I was ready a long time ago," I replied. "I just didn't know it." Tomorrow, the court would authorize the eviction. The notices would be delivered while Lisa and Brandon were still away, unaware of how much ground they had already lost. They wanted to play games with my life. Now they would lose everything they thought they controlled. And when they returned, there would be nothing left for them to claim. It was early. The kind of morning where the world feels too quiet, like it knows something is coming. The court order sat in my bag as Ruth drove me back to the house one final time. My house. Lisa was still at her spa retreat, oblivious. Brandon right beside her, most likely drunk on whatever fantasy life they thought they had secured. They hadn't returned yet, and that was exactly what I needed. The moving truck arrived first. Not loud, not showy. Just a crew of quiet, efficient men who had seen situations like this before. They didn't ask questions. They had their list. A list meticulously prepared by Mr. Kaplan, backed by court orders and evidence. The front door opened easily now with my new keys. The house was silent, but it no longer felt like it belonged to strangers. With every step I took across those polished floors, it became mine again. The movers worked swiftly. Lisa's imported dining set, tagged and loaded. The Persian rug she had bragged about, rolled and packed. The brand new Italian leather sectional she posted on her social media, carefully wrapped in plastic and carried out the front door. Every luxury she had bought with my money, every single thing she had flaunted as if it were hers, was being stripped away piece by piece. It wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. As they worked, I wandered into the kitchen. The new marble countertops gleamed under the morning light. Lisa's design, not mine. She had wanted everything to look like one of those glossy magazines she worshipped. But none of it ever felt like home. Not like the old wooden table my husband and I used to sit at during long evenings after work, sipping tea and talking about the future we were building. The table was long gone, of course. Lisa had thrown it out during one of her modernization phases. I touched the cold surface of the marble. "You never understood what made a home, Lisa," I whispered to the empty room. By mid-afternoon, the house stood hollowed. The shell remained, but everything she had stuffed inside to pretend she was powerful was gone, frozen, seized, waiting for legal disposition. The locks had been changed, the alarm code reset, the security cameras installed. The fortress she thought she controlled now stood fortified against her. When the last moving truck pulled away, I stood on the front steps, keys in my hand, watching the sun dip low. Quiet doesn't mean weak. It never had. They just thought my silence meant surrender. But they were wrong. The screaming started before Lisa's car had even come to a full stop. From behind the tall hedges, I watched as she stormed out of the SUV, her face twisted, Brandon following behind her like a shadow already shrinking. The moment she reached the front steps and saw the changed locks, her voice cut through the quiet like a knife. "What the hell is this?" She yanked at the door handle, rattling it violently, as if the sheer force of her tantrum would undo the locks. Brandon stood stiff behind her, his phone already in his hand, likely dialing the lawyer they both assumed would save them. I stepped forward then, walking slowly, deliberately into view. Lisa froze when she saw me. Her face went pale, then flushed deep red as the full weight of what had happened began to dawn on her. What are you doing here?" she shrieked. I met her gaze, calm and unshaken. "I live here. Remember?" Brandon muttered behind her. "Call the police." "Go ahead," I said softly, almost kindly. "Call them." Lisa's jaw trembled as she fumbled with her phone. "You have no right to lock us out. You're sick. You're unstable. This house isn't safe with you in it." I tilted my head slightly. "Is that what you've been telling everyone? That I'm mentally incompetent? That I left voluntarily?" Her mouth opened, but no words came. I took another slow step forward. "You forgot, Lisa. You never owned this house. You managed the accounts. You spent my money. But the deed? The inheritance? The legal authority? That was always mine." Her eyes darted back to Brandon, desperate for backup. But I saw it in him. The hesitation. The slow, sinking realization that they were standing on crumbling ground. I lowered my voice, each word cutting sharper than any shout ever could. "I trusted you. I opened my home to you when you had nothing. And you repaid me by treating me like an obstacle. Like a burden." Lisa's face contorted. "You don't understand everything we've done for you," I smiled then. Not with anger. With the kind of quiet certainty that left no room for argument. "No, Lisa. I understand perfectly. That's why I took back everything you stole. Legally. Permanently." She screamed then, voice breaking. "You can't do this!" Behind her, Brandon's phone was still pressed to his ear, but I could hear the faint voice of the dispatcher on speaker. "Ma'am, there's already a court order on file. This is a civil matter." I watched as her last hope dissolved right in front of her. Lisa spun back to me, her voice now a pitiful whimper. "Mom, please, we can fix this. We're family." Now she remembered we were family. I let the silence hang heavy between us before I finally spoke, my voice steady as stone. "You only remember family when you're locked out." Her sob echoed as I turned and walked back inside, locking the door behind me with a calm final click. I watched them from the window. Lisa stood frozen on the front steps, her sobs breaking into desperate gasps as the reality slammed into her. Brandon paced behind her, his phone still gripped tight, but there was no more bravado in his movements. Then came the final crack. He stopped pacing and turned to her sharply. "I told you we were pushing too far." His voice was low, but I could hear it through the thin pane of glass. "I told you this was dangerous." Lisa whipped around, wild-eyed. "You're blaming me now, after everything we've done together?" Brandon shook his head, stepping back from her. "We? No, Lisa. This was always your game." I could see it unraveling, the thin alliance they had built on greed starting to fracture under pressure. He had stood by her while the money flowed. But now that the well had gone dry, he was looking for a way to distance himself. Coward. Lisa grabbed at his sleeve, panicked. "Brandon, don't you dare leave me standing here like this." But he pulled his arm free with one sharp jerk. "You're on your own." And just like that, he walked toward his car, leaving her standing alone in front of the house she no longer owned, under a sky that suddenly felt much bigger, much colder. I didn't move. I stood there behind the glass, watching her crumble in real time. She fell to her knees on the walkway, her wailing breaking the still afternoon air. The neighbors had started peeking out from behind their curtains now, watching the spectacle of the devoted daughter who had bragged so long about her life of sacrifice. The masks were falling, the lies unraveling. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Because beneath her sobs wasn't grief. It wasn't even shame. It was the panic of someone who had never imagined a world where consequences could actually reach her. The front door behind me felt solid beneath my hand. This was my house, my life, my freedom. And for the first time in a long time, it was mine alone. By the next morning, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. I could feel the shift in the air when I stepped out onto the porch with my coffee. Curtains twitched. Cars slowed as they passed. The whispers that Lisa had fed them for years were collapsing under the weight of what they had seen with their own eyes. Lisa hadn't come back that night. She was staying somewhere else now, most likely scrambling for legal advice, searching for loopholes that didn't exist. But there was nothing left for her to grab onto. The bank accounts were locked. The house legally secured. The fraudulent transactions frozen under court investigation. The storm had hit, and she was the one left, standing outside in the wreckage. Ruth joined me on the porch, handing me a fresh cup of tea. "They're all talking, you know," she said softly, almost amused. "Let them," I answered. My voice was steady. "They can talk all they want. This time, I'm not the one who should be embarrassed." Ruth glanced toward the house next door, where Mrs. Calloway peeked through her window, pretending not to stare. "For years they believed every word she said about you," Ruth added. "And now they've seen the truth." I took a sip of tea, the warmth grounding me. The truth always comes out. It just takes longer when people don't want to see it. And for the first time in years, I didn't care what any of them thought. Their pity, their whispers, their curiosity. None of it touched me anymore. They hadn't been there when Lisa chipped away at my independence piece by piece. They hadn't seen the manipulation dressed up as concern. But now they were seeing the aftermath. A few cars stopped briefly at the curb. Distant cousins, so-called friends of Lisa's, too ashamed to approach, too curious to stay away. But no one came up the steps. They didn't know what to say. The perfect image Lisa had built was broken. And in its place stood the woman they thought they'd buried under the labels of fragile, forgetful, burdensome. I was still here, still standing. Ruth's voice broke the silence again. "Do you regret it, Margaret?" I shook my head. "I regret trusting someone who didn't deserve it, but I don't regret fighting to take my life back." The front door creaked slightly behind me as the breeze rolled through. My home, my name back on every document, my dignity intact. Lisa may have tried to erase me, but in the end she erased herself.